There is a difference between an airport that is bad and an airport that is dangerous. A bad airport has broken escalators and no food options past security, and a departure board that tells you nothing useful. A dangerous airport has something else entirely. It has runways where planes nearly collide. It has airspace so congested that controllers are managing too many aircraft with too little margin for error. It has warnings that were filed, reviewed, and not acted on, until the day they were acted on by the situation itself. Flying remains one of the safest forms of transportation ever developed. That is not in dispute. But safety is not uniform. It is not evenly distributed across every airport and every runway and every piece of airspace in the country. Some places are safer than others, and some places have the data to prove they are not. Today, we are counting down the 10 most dangerous airports in the United States. Not the most frustrating, not the most delayed, but the ones where the documented evidence of close calls, near misses, runway incursions, and in one case an actual fatal collision, tells a story that every traveler should know. Let's start with an airport that most people pass through without a second thought, and that the FAA data says they probably should think about twice. Number 10. Boston Logan International Airport. BOS. Boston Logan is the largest airport in New England, handling more than 40 million passengers a year out of a facility that sits on a peninsula in Boston Harbor. The water surrounds it on 3 sides. The runways extend toward the harbor in multiple directions. The approaches are over water, through the airspace of one of the oldest and most densely built cities in America. It is a complicated place to fly, and the numbers reflect that. Between 2021 and 2024, Boston Logan recorded 83 runway incursions, placing it tied for 4th among all U.S. airports in total incidents. More concerning, BOS was one of only 8 airports in the country that accounted for nearly a third of all high-risk Category A and B incursions nationally during that period. Those are the incidents where a collision was narrowly avoided or could have occurred without immediate action. Not close calls in the casual sense, close calls in the formal, documented FAA classified sense. The airport's layout contributes to the problem. Logan has 6 runways in 5 different configurations, crossing and intersecting in ways that create complexity for pilots navigating the taxiway system, particularly in low visibility conditions. Fog, snow, and rain are a routine part of the Boston operating environment. The harbor approaches mean that go-arounds and missed approaches bring aircraft back over water in busy airspace. Logan is a great airport in many ways. Modern terminals, good transit access, strong on-time performance relative to its peers. But the runway incursion data is real, and it reflects the genuine complexity of operating in one of America's most constrained airport environments. Now, imagine a commercial flight on final approach to Logan on a foggy November evening. The harbor is below, the runway is ahead. In the tower, a controller is managing multiple aircraft in converging positions. Somewhere on the taxiway, a ground vehicle has entered a restricted area. An alarm activates. Everything resolves. This time. Number 9. Austin-Bergstrom International Airport. A U.S. Austin is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. In the last decade, its population has surged, its tech industry has expanded, and its airport has absorbed the consequences. Passenger numbers that have grown faster than the infrastructure built to handle them, in a facility that was not originally designed for the volume it now processes. Between 2021 and 2024, Austin-Bergstrom recorded 2 high-risk runway incursions, Category A or B events, the most serious classifications the FAA uses. That placed it among the 8 airports nationally that accounted for a disproportionate share of the country's most dangerous runway incidents. For an airport of its size and relative youth, that number is notable. The airport operates on 2 parallel runways and handles more than 30 million passengers annually, a number that has grown dramatically in recent years as Austin's profile has risen. The rapid increase in operations has put pressure on every part of the system. Ground handling, air traffic control staffing, and the coordination required to manage a busier and busier airfield with infrastructure that has been playing catch-up since the growth began. Austin is in the process of expanding. New gates, new terminals, new capacity, all of it designed to match the city it now serves. But the gap between the airport that exists today and the demand being placed on it remains real, and the incursion data from 2021 to 2024 reflects a period when that gap was at its widest. Now imagine a regional jet, cleared to cross an active runway at AUS on a busy Friday afternoon. Another aircraft cleared to take off on the same runway. 2 controllers, 2 clearances. A gap of seconds between them that only closes because one crew sees the other in time. The investigation report will call it a Category B incursion. The passengers on both aircraft will never know it happened. Number 8. San Francisco International Airport, SFO. San Francisco International is one of the busiest airports on the West Coast, handling more than 50 million passengers a year and serving as a primary hub for United Airlines and a major gateway to Asia and the Pacific. It sits on a narrow strip of land extending into San Francisco Bay, surrounded by water on 3 sides, with approaches that require precise navigation over the bay in an environment where fog is not an occasional inconvenience, but a regular operational reality. Between 2021 and 2024, SFO recorded 3 high-risk Category A or B runway incursions, tied for the most of any airport in the country during that period. All 3 airports that recorded the maximum number of high-risk incidents were in California. SFO was the only major commercial hub among them. The airport's runway configuration is part of the problem. SFO has 2 pairs of parallel runways, but the inner pair is so close together that the FAA prohibits simultaneous instrument approaches in low visibility conditions. When fog rolls in off the bay, which it does regularly, the airport effectively loses half its runway capacity, creating bottlenecks that cascade through operations. In 2017, an Air Canada flight came within feet of landing on a taxiway occupied by 4 other aircraft after the crew confused it for the runway in reduced visibility. All aircraft were carrying passengers. Nobody died. The NTSB called it one of the most serious runway incidents in recent American aviation history. The fog at SFO is not going away. The runway configuration is not changing. The approaches over the bay in low visibility will continue to require the kind of precise, margin-free execution that leaves little room for any link in the chain to fail. Now imagine descending into SFO on a June morning when the marine layer has rolled in from the bay. Visibility is low, the crew is on instruments, the runway is ahead, or what they believe is the runway. The lights below could be the runway, or they could be a taxiway full of aircraft. They have seconds to be certain. This scenario has already happened at SFO. It almost ended differently. Number 7. Chicago Midway International Airport, MDW. Chicago Midway is the second airport in Chicago, the smaller and older sibling to O'Hare, operating out of a facility that is entirely surrounded by city on all sides. Houses, streets, and neighborhoods that press right up against the perimeter fence. There is no buffer zone at Midway. The runways end, and the city begins. Between 2021 and 2024, Chicago Midway recorded 89 runway incursions, the second highest total of any airport in the United States, behind only a non-commercial general aviation facility. Of those 89 incidents, 2 were classified as high-risk Category A or B events, placing Midway among the 8 most dangerous airports in the country for serious runway near misses. For a commercial airport of its size, that rate is among the highest in American aviation. The airport's layout explains much of the problem. Midway has 5 runways in a compact configuration, crossing each other at angles in a space that was designed for a smaller era of aviation. The taxiway system is complex, the sightlines are limited, and the sheer density of operations, Southwest Airlines runs one of its largest hubs here, means aircraft are constantly moving through a constrained environment with very little margin. In December 2005, a Southwest Airlines Boeing 737 overran the runway at Midway in a snowstorm and slid into an intersection, killing a child in a passing car. The runway, at less than 7,000 feet, was too short for the conditions. The city around Midway is not going anywhere, the runways are not getting longer, and the operations are not getting lighter. Every flight that lands at Midway lands in one of the most unforgiving airport environments in the country. Now imagine a Southwest flight on final at Midway on a winter evening. Snow is falling. The runway looks shorter than it should because the approach lights are partially obscured. The aircraft touches down. The brakes engage. The end of the runway is coming faster than the aircraft is slowing. The runway ends. The city is right there. Number 6. San Diego International Airport, SAN. San Diego International Airport has 1 runway. It is the busiest single runway commercial airport in the United States, handling more than 25 million passengers a year through a facility that has no redundancy, no backup, and no margin when that runway is compromised. Between 2021 and 2024, San Diego recorded 3 high-risk Category A or B runway incursions, tied for the most of any airport in the country during that period. For a single runway airport, the geometry of a near miss is different than at a multi-runway facility. At SFO or Midway, a close call can sometimes be resolved by diverting to a parallel runway. At SAN, there is no parallel runway. Every aircraft arriving or departing uses the same piece of pavement. Every incursion involves that single strip of concrete. The airport sits in the middle of the city, hemmed in by downtown San Diego on one side, Mission Bay on another, and a residential neighborhood beyond the northern threshold where aircraft pass just over the rooftops on final approach. In 1978, Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 182 collided in midair with a Cessna over San Diego. 144 people died in what remains one of the worst aviation disasters in American history. The collision happened in the approach corridor to the same airport that is still operating today, in the same congested airspace, with the same compressed geography. San Diego has been studying alternatives to the current airport for decades. Every proposal has faced obstacles of land, cost, or politics. The single runway remains. The geography remains. The traffic keeps growing. Now imagine a commercial flight on short final to San Diego. The city spread out beneath it, houses passing below the wing. On the taxiway, a smaller aircraft has missed a hold short line. It is moving toward the runway threshold. The tower sees it. The landing aircraft is 30 seconds out. One runway, no alternatives, no room for the second mistake. Number 5. Newark Liberty International Airport. EWR Newark has already appeared on this channel for being the worst airport in America to fly through. In 2025, it earned a second appearance because in the spring of that year, it stopped being merely the most frustrating airport in the country and became the most visibly dangerous. On April 28, 2025, the Philadelphia Air Traffic Control Facility that manages Newark's airspace lost radar and communications with all aircraft in its control for 90 seconds. Controllers could not see the planes. They could not talk to the planes. For 90 seconds, the aircraft approaching one of the busiest airports in the northeastern United States were invisible to the people responsible for keeping them apart. In the aftermath, multiple controllers took trauma leave under a contract provision allowing them to step away after a psychologically traumatic event. The outage was not an isolated equipment failure. It was the consequence of a decision made in 2024 to relocate Newark's air traffic controllers from a facility on Long Island to Philadelphia, more than 100 miles away. Connected by telecommunications lines that controllers had warned before the move happened were not reliable enough for the task. After the move, controllers reported multiple radar and communications failures. The warnings were filed. The move happened anyway. The lines failed. An air traffic controller told MSNBC in May 2025 that travelers should avoid Newark at all costs because it was not a safe situation for the flying public. The Transportation Secretary acknowledged publicly that what happened at Newark would happen at other airports unless the entire national air traffic control infrastructure was rebuilt. Newark was not an outlier. It was a preview. Now imagine being on final approach to Newark on April 28, 2025. In a facility in Philadelphia, the radar has just gone dark. The controller handling your aircraft cannot see it, cannot talk to it. The aircraft is still descending. The runway is still there. But the person responsible for making sure nothing else is in your path has, for 90 seconds, lost the ability to do that job. You landed safely. You will never know how close it was. Number 4. Chicago O'Hare International Airport, ORD. Chicago O'Hare is the second busiest airport in the United States and the primary hub for both United Airlines and American Airlines simultaneously. On its busiest days, it handles more than 2,600 flights. It has 8 runways. It has its own zip code. It has a transit station. It is, in every meaningful sense, a city inside a city, and it operates in the airspace above one of the most congested aviation corridors in the world. Between 2021 and 2024, Chicago O'Hare recorded 83 runway incursions, tied with Boston Logan for 4th among all U.S. airports. The scale of O'Hare means that even a low rate of incursions per million operations produces a large absolute number. 2 airlines running competing hub operations with overlapping banks of flights, hundreds of aircraft on the ground simultaneously. a taxiway system of extraordinary complexity. These are the conditions inside which every O'Hare ground movement occurs. In January 2023, a FedEx cargo Boeing 767 landed on a runway at O'Hare while a Southwest Airlines Boeing 737 was in the process of taking off on the same runway. The FedEx aircraft passed over the Southwest jet at approximately 40 feet. At runway speed. The NTSB investigation found that the air traffic controller had cleared both aircraft without recognizing the conflict. The Southwest aircraft was in the air before the controller realized what was happening. The margin between a near miss and a disaster was 40 feet, and the skill of the Southwest crew in getting airborne before impact. O'Hare is not going to get smaller. The operations are not going to get lighter. The complexity is structural, not accidental. And in January 2023, that complexity almost produced the worst aviation disaster in American history. Now imagine being on the Southwest 737 that morning. You are rolling down the runway. At the far end, lights are appearing. A large aircraft is getting closer very quickly. The captain pushes the throttles. The nose comes up, 40 feet, and then it is over. The NTSB report runs to hundreds of pages. The passengers never knew. Number 3. Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, DCA. Reagan National Airport operates in the most restricted, most surveilled, and most politically complicated airspace in the United States. The White House is nearby. The Capitol is nearby. The Pentagon is nearby. The restricted zones that protect those buildings force every aircraft arriving and departing DCA into a narrow corridor over the Potomac River. A corridor that is also used by military helicopters, medical transport flights, police aircraft, and the training missions of the Army's 12th Aviation Battalion, based at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. On January 29, 2025, that corridor claimed 67 lives. American Airlines, Flight 5342, operated by PSA Airlines, was on final approach to runway 33 at DCA when it collided in midair with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter at approximately 300 feet above the Potomac River. All 67 people aboard both aircraft were killed. It was the first fatal commercial aviation disaster in the United States in 16 years. The NTSB chairwoman said there was a serious safety issue in the airspace surrounding Reagan National. 18 families of the victims issued a statement calling it a symptom of broader failures in the aviation safety system. What the investigation revealed was that the situation had been building for years. Controllers at DCA had proposed moving the helicopter route away from the fixed-wing approach path after a 2013 near miss in the exact same location. They were told no. The proposal resurfaced. It was not acted on. Internal safety reports obtained after the crash revealed that the day before the collision, January 28, 2025, there had been 2 additional close calls between passenger jets and military helicopters at the same airport. 2 close calls the day before. On January 29th, the close call did not resolve. Reagan National moves 25 million passengers a year, 10 million more than its intended capacity, according to the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. Its busiest runway handles more than 800 flights a day, roughly 1 per minute. Congress has continued adding flights over the objections of safety officials, and since the January 2025 crash, at least 4 additional incidents of aircraft and helicopters getting too close have triggered safety reports at DCA. Now imagine the 67 people on that flight and that helicopter on the evening of January 29, 2025. The approach was standard, the weather was clear, the runway was ahead, and in the dark above the Potomac, at 300 feet, the margin that had held for 16 years finally ran out. It was not an accident that came from nowhere. It was an accident that was documented, flagged, proposed against, and not prevented. That is the specific kind of dangerous that Reagan National is, and it is still operating today. Number 2. John F. Kennedy International Airport, JFK is the most important international airport in the United States. It handles more international passengers than any other airport in the country, connects New York to more global destinations than any other facility, and sits at the center of the world's most complex aviation market. 3 major airports, the world's most congested airspace, and a geographic bottleneck that has no easy engineering solution. In 2025, FAA data showed a 47% increase in missed connections at JFK, directly attributable to ground congestion, a number that reflects not just operational inefficiency, but the structural overcrowding of an airport that is trying trying to process a volume of traffic its infrastructure was not designed for. But the ground congestion is a symptom. The deeper issue is the airspace. JFK shares approach and departure corridors with LaGuardia and Newark, all three. Airports funnel aircraft through the same narrow band of sky above the New York metropolitan area. When one airport experiences a disruption, the others feel it within minutes. When weather hits, the cascade effect can ground hundreds of aircraft simultaneously across all three facilities. And in that congested airspace, the margin for error on every approach, every departure, every handoff between controllers is compressed to a degree that few other aviation environments in the world replicate. The ongoing $42 billion transformation of JFK, new terminals, new taxiways, new road access, is the largest airport infrastructure project in American history. It acknowledges, implicitly, that the airport in its current form is not adequate for what it is being asked to do, but the construction itself adds a layer of complexity and disruption to an environment that was already operating at the edge of its capacity. The airport of 2030 will be different. The airport of today is where the flights are. Now, imagine a transatlantic departure from JFK on a summer evening. The taxiway is backed up. The aircraft holds for 30 minutes before reaching the runway. In the approach corridor above, arriving traffic is stacked in holding patterns. Three airports sharing the same sky, each one generating delays that ripple into the others, in airspace that the people who manage it describe consistently as the most challenging in the world. The flights depart, the flights arrive. The margin is measured in seconds and feet. Most days, it holds. Number 1. Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. DCA, Revisited Reagan National, appears twice on this list because the January 29, 2025 collision is not the end of the story. It is the middle of it. Before the crash, DCA had documented near misses in the same airspace going back to at least 2013. Controllers proposed fixes. The fixes were not implemented. Congress continued adding flights to an airport already running 10 million passengers above its intended capacity. The helicopter routes that threaded through the fixed-wing approach paths remained in place because the military needed them for national security reasons. Runway 33, the shorter, less used runway where the collision occurred, was used intermittently when the controller needed to manage traffic flow, bringing arriving aircraft into direct proximity with helicopter routes that passed within 15 feet vertically of the approach path. Nearly one-third of controller positions at the Reagan Tower remain unfilled, according to FAA figures from a year after the crash. The controllers who were on duty the night of January 29th took medical leave. Several have not returned. The NTSB's investigation found that the control tower had been operating below its standard staffing level on the night of the collision. The position that normally handled helicopter control had been combined with local control earlier in the shift than usual. The NTSB said it was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of broader failures. And the airport is still there. The flights are still operating. Reagan National is the most dangerous airport in America, not because of what might happen there, because of what already did. So there you have it. 10 airports, 10 different ways the system gets close to the edge. Some are dangerous because of geography. Runways surrounded by water, city, or mountains, with approaches that leave no room for error. Some are dangerous because of volume. More aircraft than the infrastructure was designed to manage, in airspace that was already at its limits before the next flight was added. Some are dangerous because of decisions, proposals that were rejected, warnings that were filed, fixes that were not implemented until after the thing they were meant to prevent had already happened. The passengers on this list flew through these airports every day. Most of them arrived safely. Most of them always will. Flying remains extraordinarily safe, and the people who work in American aviation, the controllers, the crews, the safety inspectors, are, most of the time, doing extraordinary work under extraordinary pressure. But most of the time is not all of the time. And the data exists. The incursion reports exist. The NTSB investigations exist. The safety recommendations that went unimplemented for years exist. 67 people went into the Potomac River because the margin ran out. The margin is thinner in some places than others. Thanks for watching.